A certain afternoon, for those of you that know me, my name is Joao. I just finished my MA in theology here at Newbold College, and I come originally from Portugal. And a certain afternoon back in Portugal in primary school, I was ecstatic. My esteemed frenemy, Fabio, had just invited me to play football. And it doesn't seem like it's a very important event in the life of a kid when someone invites you to play football, especially if you're a Portuguese kid, because you're used to, you should play football every day, right? But you see, the rules of primary school football clearly stipulated that the owner of the ball was allowed to decide who could play and who couldn't. And having been born with neither the speed of Mbappe nor the technique of Neymar, I wasn't picked to play football very often. So that afternoon, I was ecstatic. I was really, really looking forward to play football. So I stepped onto the improvised pitch and I was confident. I was so happy. I was feeling powerful and strong and proud, which was good. And then someone passed me the ball, which was bad, because I didn't know what to do next. But when I looked up, I realized that I had a clear line to goal. I could just pick the ball and start running toward goal, and that's what I did. My closest opponent was 5-10 meters behind me, and I was just running. And then I shot the ball, and the ball went straight into goal. And as I raised my arms to celebrate what was the first goal of my career, I realized that not everyone was so happy. People had just stopped, and they were having these puzzled expressions on their faces. There was a first moment of silence, and then actually Fabio started laughing, and all the kids followed suit. "Oh man, you are so dumb," Fabio said. "4 eyes, go and check your vision," another kid added. And at first I didn't necessarily realize what was happening, and then I realized that I had scored an own goal. I was so embarrassed. That pride and confidence I had first exhibited when I stepped onto the pitch were soon gone. That joy that I had when he invited me to play football soon turned into anger. And I could tell you, I could smack that guy right there, right then. But you see, I learned very well from my parents and from my Sabbath school teachers that Christians don't fight. Christians turn the other cheek. And so, instead of picking a fight, I decided to do take the other path, which was to run to my mom, who was a teacher at that school, just crying and complaining about the mean kids and Fabio. And as my mom started comforting me, we started hearing screams outside, and we looked out the window. And Fabio just passed by running. And just behind him, all the friends that were mocking me, and behind them, my little brother, who was 2 years younger than me, holding a shovel above his head with a clear intention of harming them. My brother, I thought at the time, was not a Christian. He clearly wasn't listening when our Sabbath school teachers told us that Christians don't fight, Christians turn the other cheek. And later that night, he was actually lectured on that precise point by my parents. But you see, the problem is that's the way that I was taught. The text should be read, right? Christians don't fight; Christians turn the other cheek. But this morning, I would like to suggest to you that people in Jesus' time would take those words in a quite different fashion. People like Hannah, an 11-year-old Jewish girl from the nearby town of Capernaum. On a certain day, Anna heard the news that a great healer and preacher was coming into the region, and she managed to get out of her daily duties just to go and meet this guy. She wanted to see him. She wanted to be there. And she found him surrounded by a crowd on top of a hill, delivering a speech that we now know as the Sermon on the Mount. And after a while, she heard these exact words. You all heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you all to not resist the evildoer. Well, she didn't necessarily hear these exact words, because I'm pretty sure that the English skills of Jesus were not very, very, very high. The way Matthew records this speech, for example, does not include the words to resist or to not resist. The verb resist was the way that the scholars that translated the Bible into English for the first version, the King James Bible, descended to render a Greek word that was associated with violent retaliation. So in that case, a more accurate translation of this text would read, do not fight back. Not do not resist, do not fight back. Or instead, do not retaliate violently against the evildoer. In other words, Jesus was not commanding his followers to avoid resistance. He was commanding his followers to avoid violent resistance. In other words, even, Christians don't fight, but that doesn't mean that they can't or shouldn't resist the evildoers, the oppressors. And then the preacher continued, but turn the other cheek to whomever slaps you on the right cheek. Hannah was quite familiar with slaps on the right cheek and what slaps on the right cheek meant. Not too long ago, she had witnessed as her dad had slapped her mom on the right cheek. Being an observant Jew, he didn't use the left hand because the left hand were used only for unclean tasks. Instead, you use the backside of the right hand. It wasn't a fight amongst equals. That slap meant that it was a fight between someone who had power, someone who was in power, her dad, and someone without power, her mom. It was a slap designed to shame, to humiliate, to reinforce certain power structures that were in place. And it was designed to insult. And that's precisely how Anna's mom felt. They didn't talk about it later, of course, but Hannah knew that her mom had felt shamed, humiliated, insulted. So yeah, Hannah was quite familiar with what slaps on the right cheek meant. The idea of turning the other cheek, though, was not something that she was very familiar with. In that context, turning the other cheek meant that it was actually an act of defiance. Turning the other cheek after being slapped with the backside of the hand on your right cheek meant you have slapped me as if I'm your inferior. But I am not your inferior. Now slap me as if I'm your equal. That's what it meant at the time. It was a statement against the attacker's ability to break the person who had been attacked. It was an inversion of the power structure. And throughout history, that was precisely what turning the other cheek has achieved many, many times. On the 2nd of October 2017, the world woke up to news of violence and hundreds injured. In Great Britain, the headlines of The Guardian, The Independent, and The Scotsman all read the same thing. Hundreds hurt. Hundreds hurt as Catalonia poll descends into violence. The TV channels played over and over again dozens of photos and videos of well-armored Spanish police agents beating up, dragging, and shooting rubber bullets at Catalan citizens. In one particularly violent video, police agents were seen as dragging and throwing people down the staircase of a school-turned polling station. Men and women, old and young, it didn't matter. One by one, they were all thrown and dragged down the stairs after staging a sitting protest in order to prevent the police to get to the ballot boxes. Now, my purpose this morning is not exactly to side with either of the factions. Portugal already has a complicated enough history with Spain for me to weigh into all of that discussion. And on top of that, I am both friends with Azun and Albert, and I intend to keep my friendship like that after the sermon. But what I'm arguing here is that these people were turning the other cheek the way that Jesus wanted us to do it. They were not violent, but they were standing up against the perceived oppressor. And by doing so, they managed to temporarily invert the power structure, because on that day, on the 2nd of October, the discussion was no longer on whether the referendum was legal or illegal. The discussion was about the disproportionate actions that the Spanish police took against its citizens. Yeah, Hannah wasn't familiar with this type of turning the other cheek. She knew people who had responded violently to oppression, and she knew people who had submitted to oppression. But now Jesus was giving her and all of the people there a third way, the way of non-violent resistance. Yes, Christians don't fight, but Christians can turn the other cheek. And then the preacher continued, and leave also your coat to whomever wishes to sue you for your clothes. Hannah wasn't very learned in the specifics of Jewish law. But as she was standing there that afternoon, she could see and hear the reactions of the crowds. Some people gasped. Other people, like Hannah herself, just bursted out laughing. You know, the concept of someone giving their coats after being taken away their clothes was not something that the Jewish people were comfortable, because it meant that that person would be naked in front of everyone else. A bit like if someone would come on stage right now and start taking my clothes off, I'm pretty sure that Sean would tackle that person even before my trousers would come off, right? We are not very comfortable with that idea either, but Jews clearly weren't comfortable with that idea. Later that evening, Anna asked her father about what the preacher actually meant. And her father told her about the law of Moses. He told her how a creditor could sue a debtor for their clothes if the debtor didn't have enough to pay the debt, right? He quoted a portion of Exodus, but he also told her that the law made certain provisions for poor people. He quoted a portion of the Exodus from memory. If you take your neighbor's coat in pawn, you shall restore it before the sun goes down, for it may be your neighbor's only clothing to use as cover. In what else shall that person sleep? And if your neighbor cries out to me, I will listen, for I am compassionate. Exodus 22, 26 and 27. And then he told Hannah about his late great-uncle Jeremiah. Jeremiah wasn't a wealthy man. And one day, he was sued for his clothes precisely because he didn't have any other possessions. Of course, taking into consideration his financial situation, the creditor could have just forgiven him. He could have just forget about the debt and move on with his life. But this guy, he was a greedy man. He wanted to take as much as possible. And so on that day in court, poor old Uncle Jeremiah decided to do precisely what Jesus is saying here. When people took away his clothes, he gave also their coats, and he was naked in front of everyone in court. Guys, you should have seen the creditor's face as Uncle Jeremiah stripped down to his birth suit. And then he simply walked out the court, and as he was walking around town, some people started wondering what was the reason behind his curious choice of attirement. And they asked him, what's happening? Why are you naked? And Uncle Jeremiah explained the situation. And one by one, slowly at first, but then faster at the end, the whole village stood by Uncle Jeremiah's side. Soon the whole village was protesting against this injustice that had been committed to poor old Uncle Jeremiah. And by the end of the day, the creditor had returned the clothes to Uncle Jeremiah. Christians don't fight, but they can surely give also their coats. And when her dad told her this story, Hannah finally understood what this preacher and healer was trying to say all along. And as she thought about the third thing he said that afternoon, she was able to understand it much better. And if someone forces you to walk 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Hannah was young, but she knew a thing or two about walking 1 mile or being forced to walk 1 mile. It never happened to her, of course, but she knew people who had been forced to walk 1 mile. This text is basically referring to the occupiers or the foreign army's ability to force labor onto the subjected people. And Hannah knew exactly what were the implications of that labor. She had heard about the 1 mile rule before. Roman soldiers could force a Jewish person to walk with them, to carry their gear or to guide them through an unknown path for 1 mile. But they couldn't force the person to walk any more than that. A 2nd mile would actually be a very serious breach of Roman military law, and the soldier would be punished. So as Hannah understood all of this, she started imagining this situation in which a Roman soldier would force a Jewish person to carry their backpack for 1 mile. And when they get to the next mile mark, they stop, and the Roman soldier says, "Okay, thank you so much. You have done your part. Now let me have my backpack, please." And the person said, "No, I'll take it. I'll take it 1 more mile." The Roman soldier, no, listen, please give me my backpack back. Let's not walk anymore. Just stop now. And no, don't worry. No, listen, give me my backpack back. Don't walk anymore. That was basically what would happen with this 1 mile rule if someone would walk a 2nd mile. And when Hannah heard at first, she didn't understand, and she was a bit actually upset at this preacher because it seemed like he was helping these foreign invaders that had come onto their lands. But he was actually doing something else. He was actually encouraging his followers to once again resist non-violently against the oppressor. Because Christians don't fight, but Christians can surely walk the 2nd mile. Hannah only re-encountered the preacher 2 or 3 times more throughout her lifetime. One of those occasions was in Jerusalem, on the week that he was executed. She was there with her mom and dad to celebrate Passover, and as she saw Jesus coming into the city and going into the temple, and starting to drive the sellers, the same sellers who were taking advantage of a corrupt system to gain huge profits for themselves away from the temple, she understood what Jesus was doing. Jesus was turning the other cheek. He was giving the coat alongside with the clothes. He was walking the second mile. Or as we put it together, as we put it today, he was standing up against injustice. Christians don't fight, but Christians can surely protest. Inspired by the example of Jesus, some Christian men and women throughout the ages have decided to stand up and protest whenever faced with injustice and oppression. One of those people was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On the 2nd of December 1955, Dr. King received a phone call. And on the other side of that phone call was a man called Edgar Daniel Nixon, who told him about the previous day's arrest of a black woman named Rosa Parks. The story is very simple. Rosa was sitting on the bus one evening when the bus stopped, and in came a white man. Rosa and the three black people that were sitting in the same row of the bus were asked by the bus driver to move back because that was a place that was designed for white people. Rosa refused to give her seat to the white male passenger, and as a result, she had been detained by the police. Nixon's call had the purpose of discussing what would be the next action that they would take. And that same evening, Dr. King and Nixon arranged a meeting with all of the ministers and civic leaders of the black community, and it was decided that they would boycott the city's bus system, the city of Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott started the next Monday, the 5th of December 1955, and it was supposed to last one day. It ended up lasting 381 days, more than 1 year. And at the end of those 381 days, the city council was forced to write an ordinance that virtually gave black passengers the same rights white passengers had when riding a bus. In other words, Christians don't fight, but they can surely protest. Now, some of you, I can see from your faces, may still be wondering whether protesting is the right attitude. Dr. King seemed to have the same doubts as you do. And in his autobiography, posthumously edited by Claiborne Carson, he describes having second thoughts about the boycott. He writes, "Now, certain doubts began to bother me. Were we following an ethical course of action? Is the boycott is the boycott method basically unchristian? Isn't it a negative approach to the solution of a problem?" Eventually, his answer was that it wasn't, because the purpose of that boycott was not to put the bus companies out of business. The purpose of that boycott was to put, that's what he writes, to put justice in business. Our concern would not be to put the bus company out of business, but to put justice in business. Our concern would not be to put the bus company out of business, but to put justice in business. Because yes, Christians don't fight, but they can certainly put justice in business. The Montgomery bus boycott was full of tense moments and clashes between the city's black and white communities. On the night of the 30th of January 1956, less than 2 months after the boycott started, Dr. King's house was firebombed while he was at a mass meeting in church, and soon 300 people gathered around his house. Some people were carrying knives, some people were carrying guns, and at that moment, Dr. King had the option of actually starting, if he wanted, an armed uprising. But instead, he spoke to the crowds And I want you to listen carefully what he says. If you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not seek to get them. We cannot solve this problem through retaliatory violence. We must meet violence with non-violence. Remember the words of Jesus, "He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword." We must love our white brothers no matter what they do to us. We must make them known that we love them. Jesus still cries out in words that echo across the centuries. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them, for those that despitefully use you. This is what we must live by. We must meet hate with love. And remember, if I am stopped, this movement will not stop, because God is with this movement. Go home with this glowing faith and this radiant assurance. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. And this, of course, didn't mean that the boycott stopped. The boycott would go on for 10 more months, because Christians don't fight, but they can certainly protest and attempt to put justice in business. As I finished my sermon this morning, I don't know exactly where are you standing right now. Maybe if you are a student, you are feeling uneasy about some kind of injustice that you have seen on this campus, on your workplace, at home. Maybe if you are a woman, you are tired of this male-centered society not giving you the opportunities, or simply blatantly despise and abuse you. Maybe if you are attentive to recent developments in our church, you are feeling like it's time to speak out, to stand up, and to make your voice heard. If that is the case, I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to stand up and speak out, because our God is a compassionate God that doesn't only love mercy, but also loves justice. In doing so, of course, let's remember the words of Dr. King. Let us love our brothers and sisters. Let us, no matter what they do to us, let us pray for them. Let us meet hate with love. But let us also remember that the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount are calling us to action whenever we are confronted with injustice, whenever we are confronted with inequality, whenever we are confronted with oppression. Our duty as Christians is to stand up, to make our voices heard, to undermine the power structures in place, because our great God is a God that loves justice, and because Christians don't fight, but they can surely turn the other cheek. Amen.